Hello there, it's Antrice, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter Podcast. The Savvy Painter Podcast is the antidote to an uninspiring job. Let's face it, even if you love your job, there are days when you'd just rather be in your studio painting. I know what that feels like. Years ago, when I art-directed video games at Disney, even when it was a job that I loved, there were plenty of days, weeks even, when I'd wish I could just lock myself in my studio and work on my own paintings. I learned to see my job for what it was, my personal patron and a stepping stone to get me where I was meant to be. So whether you love your job and just need a boost to get you over the hump, or if you have the boss from hell and feel like it's sucking the life out of you, Savvy Painter is here to help you reconnect with your creative self, to inspire you by connecting you with other artists who work as hard as you do and show you that you are not alone. Every Thursday, I bring you stories from artists like Harry Stushinoff, Deborah Paris, Steve Deleuze, and Peggy Kroll-Roberts, artists who struggled with when or if to quit their day job. Learn how Harry stayed engaged with his art while working full-time. Discover what Steve did to protect his creative energy. There is no single way to solve the challenge. You can listen to different approaches and hear what each artist needed to have in place before they dove into painting full-time. Want to stay even more connected? Join the Savvy Painter email list to get weekly updates and free guides. Just go to savvypainter.com/subscribe. When you join the email list, pick up your free copy of Essential Tips for Artists, a collection of inspiring quotes and practical tips from interviews on Savvy Painter. Just go to savvypainter.com/subscribe. What you're about to hear is part 2 of a multi-part conversation with the artist Bert Silverman. If you didn't catch the first part of our chat, you can listen to it at savvypainter.com or on iTunes. You may want to go in order, or you can just keep it here and piece it together. It's entirely up to you. Bert Silverman is a classic realist painter. He's been painting and exhibiting as a painter for 60 years. He's had many solo shows and retrospective exhibitions at the Butler Institute of American Art, the Brigham Young Museum of Art, the Lime Academy of Art, and most recently at the Hofstra University Museum of Long Island. His paintings are represented in 29 public collections, including 35 pieces in the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. Bert has authored 2 instructional books and 2 monographs on painting and drawing, which were published in conjunction with his retrospective shows. Bert has lectured in graduate art programs and museums across the country on all aspects of realistic painting. Coupled with this is a highly acknowledged portrait painting career that has included private and institutional subjects, his most recent being that of Associate Justice Elena Kagan. Here is part 2 with Bert Silverman.
The thing get ahead of a young woman. It's a simple head, but it speaks constantly to me in so many levels of experience, of vision, of painterliness, of lack of painterliness, of so many complex elements that seem to say, here's a structural way of viewing art. It's not just about this particular style, but it's something about how the image was constructed and why it lives. I figure that's the same business of criteria that I was talking about. How do we get to understand why something is so wonderful?
Yeah, we're back to that conversation of why is Rembrandt's portrait 400 years later still relevant? Why are those Degas still relevant? What is it? And forget the art historians and forget the art critics. Why do people go and look at them? What is it that they're responding to?
In the same way, I mean, it's supposedly a funny, disregarded way, and it's not art historically very authentic. But people also go to see Norman Rockwell for the same reason, a different reason, actually. It's because he's memorialized a cliche. He's brought everybody back to that, oh, I know that it's so well, it's a wonderful kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. It's the idea of the perfect Thanksgiving dinner where your drunk uncle doesn't show up and nobody argues about politics and everybody has the best dinner.
And he did one painting also that, of a young girl looking at herself in a mirror, the prepubescent. And everybody knows that experience with their kids, you see.
Yeah.
So it's painting what we already know, but without making it interesting in a way. It's not what we know, but we know what we've forgotten.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I think the popularity of Rockwell is that it's nostalgia. It's almost pure nostalgia. And that's and he was purposely doing that.
I also thought he was corny. I keep putting himself in the painting. Come on.
He's it's like the Ozzie and Harriet television show. It's just like, it's the art version of that, I think. And every now and again, I enjoy it. Like every now and again, I want, like I'll watch, and if it's on, I'll watch about 15 minutes of Ozzie and Harriet, and it's charming, and it's this and it's that, but it's not real.
Yes. And we need a break from reality isn't what it started to be.
Right. I'm curious, this is just an idle curiosity on my part. What did you think of Leyendecker, J.C. Leyendecker?
Yeah, I didn't like him as much as a couple of his other contemporaries, who I thought were more painterly. Leyendecker was a little too slick. He was a little too stylized for me. Look, there's the other thing that was interesting is because the illustration was so demeaned and thought to be so inferior as commercial art by the official art establishment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I look at some of the paintings that are being done down by, young realist painters, and they're not as good as what the illustrators were doing. In fact, they were doing it better because they had a real idea to illustrate. And it's striking. For example, Howard Pyle, who's, a dramatically important painter in illustration. So one painting of his, look, an artist may only do one great painting, like a Jericho's Raft of the Medusa.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A lot of silly paintings of officers on horses and so on, except 2 or 3 portraits he did at a madhouse, which I will get to in a moment because it's an interesting thing. But Pyle's painting of a guy abandoned on a desert island, a pirate. It's a long painting, low horizon, and this figure hunched over on a strip of sand.
Mm-hmm.
Look it up. It's so evocative in a painterly way that it betrays the whole notion of illustration as somehow or other being inferior. Well, I think it's important. There are certain images that persist, and that is, in a way, a kind of a way of measuring value, the importance of the art, something that's even inexplicable. You don't have to have the answers for why everything survives, why it's great. In the absence of something more compelling in the way of an explanation, that'll have to do it. I have to leave something unexplained.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you choose your subject matter? What is it that fascinates you and causes you to say, I'm going to paint that?
I think it chooses me. And that's what I mentioned about serendipity. I did a couple of paintings recently that I think are very effective because elements came into it that were unexpected, that I had not planned about. I had done a painting many years ago of a black model seated in a chair, and I had a study I had done of the same painting. And when I was walking in the street one day, there was a big display for a movie. And it struck me as so indicative of what our sensibilities as a society were ridden by and embraced by. The idea of shooting, guns, weapons. And it was a picture of 2 guys, one guy shooting like that, opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a movie poster. And I put that in this painting of this guy sitting who was looking with an expression that was hard to figure out. It was one of distance. It's one of angst. I don't even know what the actual quality in his look was. It was a nice painting. It's black guy. Then I suddenly put him up against this poster. And the poster had a pistol pointed at his head. And in fact, it said, "Haunted by our past." That was the tagline in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, it does say something about our culture of violence and our culture of violence directed towards the Black man who is haunted by his past, by slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's now in a nice museum. So did I decide to do that? No, it was my awareness of something that people don't notice. Oh, it's another movie about shooting. And I'm saying, no, it's not that. It's something else. It's violence that's around us. So it's not taking the fact, it's channeling it into something else, something different.
Yeah, putting a unique spin on it.
I did another painting similarly of a model who was also a very intense guy. And I passed by a whole series of posters for Shakira, who I'd never heard of, singer.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you something, I'm so out of it. It's astonishing that I'm even alive. I have no idea whose names I'm reading and what they do, or actors or so. It'll happen. It's very disconcerting. Anyway, it was a big blow up of her face, and she had her hand, a finger in her mouth, and it was called the Festival of something or other. It had a slightly sexual connotation. And I photographed the mural, because the posters, without thinking about it. I said, my God, it's just the head and the finger in the mouth. But to me, it had a sexual connotation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And suddenly I had this angry Black guy, and I snapped him up against this poster, and suddenly transformed everything. It transformed the music into something apart from or dedicated to something alien. And this guy's look suddenly became one of anxiety or fear or both. And he's up against these huge heads, and he's only a small person.
Mm.
So it's a sense of his being diminished in some way in the culture which he's part of, which sometimes he enjoys a very special place as an athlete and as a performer. But, okay, is it resonate with any truthfulness? I don't know. Is it an interesting painting? It causes people to stop and say, why'd you do that? What does that mean?
And do you tell them that story?
No, I let the painting be by itself. You asked me, about subject matter.
Yeah, about what causes you to choose it, and it chooses you.
You know what my brother said to me? He said, you always paint people alone. And I looked up and I said, no, I don't. Like it was some kind of criticism. And then I realized I do. I paint portraits of people if I think somehow or other they become spokespersons for a larger assemblage of people, that they are both individuals and part of a group. They either resonate from the point of view of like I did a painting of a guy who worked for me, I had a place in the summer, and he was a mason. He laid flagstones and did wall work and so on. And it was a very hot day. 90 degrees, and he's working, and he's stripped to his waist, and he's got this marvelous beer belly. So I painted this guy. He's got a pole. He looks like an ancient Roman guard.
Yeah.
And he's got this beer belly, and I thought, oh, how wonderful. It's not, the Calvin Klein image of the perfect body. So if you live in the world, you see things.
Yeah.
If you live in your studio and your head is down, you don't see very much except you make nice designs.
Excellent point. I'd love to ask you, this is kind of a two-part question. Where do you see painting going now, and where would you like to see it go?
Tough question. You see, I hate to say things that are inordinately critical of the environment I'm in, because I think on balance, it's the best hope I have for a real impact that art can have, that is using the language of vision that I've selected, the particular kind of thinking. And at the same time, I can't make rules for it because it's subject to each and every individual involved. I would like to see something that challenges the authenticity that has been proclaimed for our current dominant art. Authenticity meaning that it somehow or other has stretched the boundaries of understanding and enhanced human experience and told us about sexism, racism, and everything else when it dangles things from the ceiling. But that it really challenges it in a way and it displaces it somehow, that it becomes, I don't see that happening realistically, mostly because of the limitations of the art that we currently have in opposition or in as an alternate. And I don't think the investment that I talked about, the $12 million shark, will let it happen. Too much money involved. Little things will peek in, like the Lucian Freud kind of thing, or the John Curran. Little exclusive kinds of pointing to things, or even an Eric Fischl. But by and large, those are individual exemplars. They don't represent something contradistinct to what is the assumption about all art, what it should look like, how it speaks, how it's described, how it's evaluated. Of course, there's an insane thing that's happened with what has become a stock market in certain kinds of objects. It's like the tulip bulb of the 17th century, when there was a great burst in the market for tulip bulbs, all of them turned out to be exactly like tulip bulbs anyplace else. And I had a conversation once with Tom Wolfe, who he projected the idea that there was going to be a huge crash in values on modernist art, that he could point to it happened with other periods in art history, which also suffered a cataclysmic decline, like the Bouguereaus and the Dutch painting and all of those, that they had a certain market value and they collapsed because they didn't sustain their intrinsic. It's a cockeyed theory. And without any disrespect to Tom Wolfe, because he's a very bright man. But I just think that forces operate differently now, and that we are so in the grip of money forces. Never before in history has there been such a disparity in wealth all over the world, that money has determined so many of our values, so many of our aspirations. What is middle-class values? What are they? It used to be, when I was a kid, they were called the bourgeoisie.
Middle class was called the bourgeoisie.
The bourgeoisie, yes, the middle class, right. Like the Dutch middle class, they were merchant class. And we had a middle class that was really not the working class, although the unions played a role in making a far more viable income for a great many people. But I'm talking about, the class of white collar people and entrepreneurs and so on. It's a very small slice of society. But the bourgeoisie, of course, forgot about Van Gogh until they were enlightened enough never to make that mistake again. So as a consequence, we got all that crap at very high prices because they're never good. Their investment will never be challenged again.
That's it. Yeah.
So how do you break out of that? And if I look at my bookshelf, I got 5 books on Picasso. Actually, 2 of them because I used to review books for what was now a defunct newspaper called the Herald Tribune.
Mm-hmm.
They had a book section, and I was asked to write reviews about art. I did one about Picasso. I did one about Thomas Eakins, another about George Inness, landscape painter. So I have some slight credential as a critic, very modest. I'm asked to write things sometimes because I suppose I have a history of having been influential in some way. A lot of people have told me how I was an inspiration, to keep working in a certain way. I always say, well, what one fool can do, another can.
That's true.
But I didn't intend to be a hero, waving a flag, follow me. I did teach classes for about 35 years here in my studio. I had about 24 people in a morning and afternoon class. Once a week, I ran it like a 15-week university course. And I impacted people by virtue of what I did and what I talked about. Mm. And that was a model. I don't know whether, people wanted to paint like me, although I'm sure people did. And I can't figure out why, because I was not able to teach them how I painted. I could teach them general principles about how you construct three-dimensional form and the kind of relationship of color and value and light, dark, and so on. Those generalized things. The rest is up to you. Who are you? I ask. What do you see? What do you see in the world? That's enough to get a style. You don't have to be identifiable by virtue of some wonderful arrangement of shape or color or something, or the way you distort something or don't distort it.
Mm. Yeah.
I keep pointing to Andrew Wyeth, who I always thought was a very powerful artist. I mean, it turns out he got a lot of awards and honors very early on, in spite of all the establishment critics. It's very interesting. If you look at his Wikipedia bio, there's a lot of shit that he accumulated, honors that were apart from what the Peter Sheldals and the New Yorker would talk about. And it was something I point to as a paradigm, a model. He found something in his world. He was a landscape painter who was not a tourist. He didn't go out and paint plein air, find a pretty spot, paint it. Mm-hmm. He owned the landscape, and he owned the feelings attached to it. Not in a direct way, not because he was a landowner, but it was a lived-in place. And what it gave him was a whole range of possible visions that he could extol or represent in a way that made that experience powerful for him and anybody else. So that was his style. You can't paint like that. You can't teach that.
Do you make a distinction between a style and your voice?
Yeah. It's funny because, the academies we're talking about, they have no style at all. And because it is, in fact, a methodology that's so rigid that it eliminates style. What we talk about, And I talked about it very honestly with these friends of mine, both of whom are very gifted. There's a woman is Amaya Gurpity, and her husband is a very sweet guy. Both of them love me. I feel horrific when I talk to them critically. I say, listen, you got to put up with me, but I think it's important for you. I think you have so much ability and you have so much sensitivity that what I'm going to say has to resonate with you. It's hard to get out of it because if it's successful, there's no reason to change.
Right. If you find your shtick and it's paying well, it's hard for people to break out of that.
I think I'm talking about my own work. I think I'm becoming more limited in a way by my search for this kind of visual intensity and accuracy. But it's what I feel at the moment, and it may be totally misguided.
That's part of exploration, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is the difference for you between a style and a voice?
Style is the language by which your voice may or may not come through.
I like that.
Even the accent, my voice, the way I articulate words has an expressive component. And if it's a different voice, something else would become very much more different and difficult to understand. But on the other hand, sì, signore, sì, non ride come americano, sono italiano. See, so the style of the way the language comes through in terms of body movement, accented possibilities, involves speaking Yiddish. Yiddish is a language that's almost defunct. But when it was used, it explained worlds in a few short words because it had embedded in it behavioral components.
The physical.
Yes, it's not just the physicality of people speaking, shrugging your shoulders, but it was something, and it's almost inexplicable. It had behavioral characteristics that the culture understood.
Mm-hmm. So the body language was just as much a part of the language as the verbal language.
But the meaning, translatable, it was. You couldn't translate it properly because it didn't explain what it felt like. And this is the feeling component. It felt like you were saying far more in using that language than if you translated it into what it meant in English.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
See, like the disparaging words, like a schmuck. A schmuck, if you translate it literally, it doesn't mean the same thing when you say it that way. It's a schmuck. It's a fool. But you say it's a fool, you see, you miss that gestalt.
That's like in Spanish, and I'm not sure. I think it's definitely specific to Argentina, and I think it's actually specific to the area that my husband comes from, Cordova. And so I think the equivalent to that, they would say that somebody is a salami. It can be a, something that you call your friend with a pat on the back, or it could be something that could get you in a fist fight if you say it with more, on the street.
So I think language and feeling and style and meaning are all a very subtle, interconnected kind of experience.
And so your voice the style is the method that you use to talk, to express yourself. So language is it's a beautiful translation for it, I think, if I'm understanding you correctly. And then your voice is what your convictions and what you believe in and what you're actually saying.
When you think about it, the visual arts have been separated from all of the other arts, from movies, from theater, from literature, from music, in a very, very peculiar way. All of those other dynamics that operate. For example, if you went to a movie made by Andy Warhol, you would sit and watch somebody sleeping for 24 hours. I think Warhol was making fun of everybody, of the smartest critics, of the Irving Sandlers of the world who adored his stuff, to everybody who had certain assumptions about art. So in a way, it was the toilet bowl, but brought up to date. And the characteristics of the other arts, what we demand narrative, we demand verisimilitude, we demand drama, we demand something more than just words that are nicely written and have a wonderful syntax and a nice flow. Shakespeare's sonnets were not just beautiful, I am a pentagonist, but something else, something richer came out of that language that was different from his plays, but they employed the same thing. I mean, Shakespeare's language seems almost like Greek to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But if you get into it,
it's so beautiful.
Exactly. And how it incorporates sensibilities, observations, modest kinds of, even Hamlet's famous soliloquy. What dreams there are when first we've shuffled off our mortal coil. And somebody could say, I don't know what's going to happen when I die. And it doesn't resonate. And that's only a fragment of all of the understanding that he brought to bear. Or maybe he didn't.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think to put it into a literary term, to me, I feel like a good painting is poetry, while lots of other paintings are, it's a journalistic explanation of what was in front of, of what was seen.
As an example, There's an artist who's an old friend of mine, very gifted, who paints with the idea we have to paint the events of the world that are happening, that are, dramatic and important, and we have to see that. And he illustrates it. He illustrates it by, for example, I mentioned the painting I had done, which is I'm going to remake of the protest. Well, he's painted a protest march, say, okay, in the sunlight, a lot of people walking, very realistic. You look at it and say, oh, that looks just like what it looks like. But it's not what it means. Because if you want, I would have a protest with a lot of signs in which there's nothing written on it. Because they all change and they're all part of the same thing. They don't mean from one moment to another. They're all part of what is the fight that the powerless have against power. So that's what you want to express. Not that one moment, but what does it mean in a more total historic fashion? You try to aim for something that, I guess it's fancy and stupid and pretentious to say epic, that it incorporates the idea of a period, a moment, a sense beyond that particular moment. I mentioned the raft of the Medusa, in a way. Now, if you think about it, what did he choose to illustrate about that? The sinking of the ship? The people trying to scurry onto the raft? No, he pictured the moment when they were being rescued.
Mm-hmm.
The ship then became something, that's what we all yearn for. Hope, to be rescued, to be saved. It's a religious painting. But that's the kind of thinking that's very tough to teach. It has to come from an individual's experience and his screwed up personality, whatever that.
I'd like to ask you one last question, and that is, what advice would you give to painters now? Those painters that you were talking about in their 30s and 40s or what have you, that are sort of in the middle of their, or maybe at the beginning of their journey.
It's funny. I'm feeling conflicted and slightly because I really hate to promote some idea for somebody else of what they should or shouldn't do. I just have to leave it up to who you are. I've said it before in other words. And then let's see what happens. If you're entangled in life some way and you're trying to get all of those tangles undone, see the threads for it, see what makes the things move, and you have a certain kind of intelligence to go with it, I think that's important. The rest is the flip of the coin. And, it's funny because there's a challenge in even the art that we've been talking about that I find interesting. The challenge is it's almost there. It's almost all of that ability, all that. And I can see places where the sensibility, specific artists. There's a young woman artist named Katy O'Hagan who has done some really effective paintings about women, about her own circumstance. Part of her personal history was very difficult. And she's painted it. And it had a resonance beyond what you would think of. And there are a couple of other people who I think are doing provocative things like that. And in fact, there's some women artists who are attempting something which I find curious. That is that they're trying to reinvent their own bodies through painting female nudes.
I'm not sure who.
It's a young British artist, Jenny Saville.
Jenny Saville, yes.
Yeah. But that remains to be seen. She was very young. My friend Degas once said he was shown a painting that was much admired by a young artist. And he said something to the effect, this is a very nice painting by this 25-year-old man. Show me what he does at 50. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That encapsulates a lot of stuff. Sometimes you don't get a better result at 50, and sometimes you do. I think I'm much better in my last 20 years than I was in my first 50.
What have you learned?
I learned to trust myself more. I was influenced by a lot of older art. I also didn't realize that my abilities would have to be honed as much as I have. The interesting thing is that it happened for me almost without my choosing, because I did a lot of work in illustration and I learned to be a lot more skillful. And it was the best training ground I've had, better than any art school. It taught me to compose effectively, to tell a story better, to be more precise in my rendering. And I wound up, as a matter of fact, doing a lot of portraits as an illustrator, which also turned out to be where probably a lot of my best abilities lie. Mm. But that being said, even portrait painters have a bad rap. I kept thinking, why? I mean, most of the paintings in museums are portraits. What,
Right.
Give me a break.
I think it's because we have this, I feel like it's almost psychotic, this idea that artists should not be making money and portraits are usually commissions. And so by their nature, they are tainted. Like, I really think that's part of it.
It's a curious kind of, I guess, a privilege notion that the privileged person doesn't really have to do something for hire. Mm-hmm. It's rather it taints your work if you're hired to do something. That means you've lost your individuality, your ability to be inventive, all of those things. And it's true to a large extent that there is a tough tug of war between the I and the thou, between what somebody else expects and what I see. So, and, the idea of painting somebody. Look, I keep thinking of Velázquez's portrait of Pope Pius.
Yes, I just saw that. Mm-hmm.
This grouchy, nasty man. Or any of Goya's portraits. I mean, he couldn't get a job today if you paid. I mean, the people that by virtue of the current convention of appealing and nice and attractive, the aesthetics that are built into a lot of portraits, unfortunately, they were totally out of, even Sargent's paintings. I kept thinking, all of those people who were painted, did they really see themselves accurately in the painting? No, they just enjoyed their wonderful costumes, their surroundings, the settings that made them look very elegant and important. Mm-hmm. I don't think they ever looked at the portraits themselves. But that's part of looking. That's what I think is important. Really, what is it? My friend Arthur Conan Doyle had a remark he made. Sherlock Holmes said so.
Yes.
He says, the trouble with you, Watson, is you see, but you do not observe. So it's a question. You see, right now, our culture is doomed to just fragmentary kinds of images that stimulate us some vagrant sense of pleasure. Mm-hmm. It's transient. Mm-hmm. My brother came back from a trip he was in Rome, Paris, and he saw a lot of great paintings. He very tuned into it, both he and my sister-in-law. And he said he couldn't understand it. He said he was looking at the Ghiberti doors on the cathedral in Florence. Mm-hmm. And all he saw were people taking selfies against the door.
I know. Oh, God. Or you go to a museum and people just want it. Like I also went to Florence recently, and I went to the Uffizi Gallery and I saw the Venus. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And nobody was looking at it. They were just taking pictures of themselves in front of it. Nobody was looking at it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. And people coming around with video cameras and videoing themselves. And, it's so...
People are recording events without understanding. Why are you doing this? It's almost because, what? I don't get it.
And the thing still is like, I know I don't take pictures usually when I go to a museum unless I just want to remember that that painting is at that museum. You know, it's not for any other reason. But even no picture you're going to take is ever going to be a good reproduction of that image. Mm-hmm. So buy a book where a professional photographer went in and got, without any glare and without any weird angles or distortion, you get to see that painting. But all these snapshots, it's just so if it's to get a good picture of it, it's self-defeating. And if it's, nobody's looking at it.
It's also interchangeable with all the other pictures on my screen.
Right.
That come through. Right. The competition for, what are you going to sit aside and, the idea of going to that experience is to say it's not part of anything else. It's uncontaminated. It's for itself alone.
Right.
If you're going to enjoy it, and you may not, you may say, it's a lot of nonsense. I don't know what's so important about this. Fine. But at least deal with it and how little or much it may mean to you.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah, my impression of the Uffizi was that it was just way too crowded. There was way too many people trying to get selfies.
Again, it comes down to the whole issue we were talking about how you paint and what the language is. You said our vision now is for identification.
Thank you for this amazing conversation. I could stay on the phone with you for or on Skype, I should say, for another couple of hours.
Well, it's great because you're such a responsive component. I mean, I think your smile and your response is really it's very gratifying for me. Yes.
Thank you. It's been an honor to have you on, and I'm so grateful for you for agreeing to doing this and also for the conversation. It was a wonderful conversation and thought-provoking and enlightening, and I very much enjoyed it.
Well, I hope it does add something to the dialogue. I mean, possibly even to get people who are upset by it, who represent contrary feelings or understandings. I mean, it's all part of the mix.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this, by the way.
That was part 2 of a 2-part conversation with the artist Bert Silverman. Thank you so much to Bert for his time and insight. Show notes for this episode are on savvypainter.com. Just click on the podcast tab to see Bert's paintings and get links to any of the artists or resources that we talked about. You can see even more of his paintings at burtonsilverman.com or at Haynes Gallery in Thomaston, Maine, or Franklin, Tennessee, Total Arts Gallery in Taos, New Mexico, or Gallery 1261 in Denver, Colorado. Savvy Painter, Gamblin Artist Colors, and Trekell Art Supplies are teaming up together to do our first online art competition. Artist Carol Marine will be jurying the show. You might remember that Carol was a guest on The Savvy Painter. She's a painter herself and the founder of DailyPaintworks.com. First place winner will receive $500 in merchandise from both Gamblin and Trekell, plus a cash prize of $250. But that's not all. The first place winner will also be a guest on the Savvy Painter podcast. So if you win first prize, you get your work in front of tens of thousands of people, $1,000 worth of art supplies to paint to your heart's content, and some cold, hard cash. Entries are being accepted from now until October 29th, 2017. Go to savvypainter.com and click on the Call to Entries tab for more information. I can't wait to see the great work that you submit. Good luck. One more thing I want to let you know. This year, you can expect a lot more workshops from Savvy Painter. If you are an artist who struggles with getting painting time in or feels like you're always busy but never really moving forward with your art, then my workshops just might interest you. Past workshops include Mindset Mastery, a 5-week online workshop to help you get past the roadblocks that keep you from painting. In it, we tackle the inner critic, fears of artists, and setting yourself up for a successful creative day. The workshop, How to Develop a Relationship with the Right Gallery, helped several artists find the right gallery and show their work. So if this is something that interests you, you can go to savvypainter.com/workshop and get on the email list. This is separate from the main list that tells you when a new episode comes out. This is just for the workshop, so you don't get quite as many emails, but when you do, there's always something really good happening. Sign up now and get a downloadable PDF with case studies that tell you exactly how 3 artists pushed through barriers that were getting in the way of their studio time. You can, for example, learn how Rhonda went from not wanting to call herself an artist to getting her very first solo show. Also, listen to an introverted artist describe how she built her confidence and then spoke in front of an audience of her peers. And you can discover the tools that Samantha used to take back her power after a decade of believing that she had no, I'm putting air quotes there, she had no talent. So again, go to savvypainter.com/workshop to reserve your place on the list. When you sign up, you get that downloadable case studies that I mentioned, but more importantly, you get exclusive invites to upcoming workshops. Most of the time when I launch a new program, it sells out before I ever announce it publicly. So reserve your spot now at savvypainter.com/workshop. Until next week, this is Antrese Wood with the Savvy Painter Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.